Folks, hello and welcome to the Tavern Chat podcast. I am doing a fireside chat in support of ZineQuest. Did I say that right? But I
You
always have
got
that.
it.
Yeah, if you've been listening to these, you know I always screw it up. I'll screw it up later on in the episode. With me today is Jesse Ephraim, or Ephraim?
Ephraim.
Ephraim. I
I
was
will
in between the
respond.
two.
I will respond to any approximation, though. I'm cool.
Yeah, my proper last name, not my social media last name, it's Stina, but everybody says Stein when they look at it, or Steiny, or Steeny, or Stain. If it comes close, I put my hand up, and it's like you're probably looking for me.
That's right.
So, Jesse, welcome. Thank you for spending time on this Valentine's Day Sunday, as I
Oh,
mentioned before we left.
no,
It
thank you
is.
so much for having me.
You know, my lovely wife Rach, I made her a nice lunch right before the show. Like pork chops on the stove,
Mm.
zucchini, a little garlic, a little marsala sauce, and then now she's right back in her yoga training because she's going to be a yoga instructor. So
Oh,
again, the world of COVID, this class would have been in person, but now the class is at home via Zoom. So I get to cook, and as we were talking beforehand, and just about general COVID and health issues, and in my case, scheduling my vaccine. And
hmm.
since I had my health issues in 2020, I cook an awful lot because I know what I'm going to put into my body, uh, and I got to avoid salt. So I know I can avoid salt if I'm cooking. If you get food from outside, you got to watch a lot of this stuff. So my wife has become very lucky. Her husband's becoming, I don't know if I say accomplished, but a competent chef and cook, I guess, at this point.
Well,
But
that's the bright side of that is for her and for you the skill development. It's like you're
yeah,
getting better at it. She benefits. So that's all good.
and that's, but Jesse and I are both pretty much young 50s. I like to stress that young part, but you can't stop learning as you get older.
That's right.
That's as long as you're learning, you're living. Once you stop learning, and then that's when you start stagnating. But Jesse,
Exactly.
um, before we start getting toward our full blown hex crawl, as we've been calling it, how did you get into the hobby? I've been asking this of everybody that sat down with me virtually, and everybody seems to have a different way they came into this hobby. But how did you come into the hobby?
I am a old grognard, but without the negative connotations of that. I'm not a grumpy guy. But I when I was 12 or 13, and I can't remember. It's kind of like I was either latter half of 12, early part of 13. But anyway,
You-
late 1979, early 1980. I got the Holmes edition, the box edition of D&D. And I was aware of D&D vaguely. A year or two earlier, a friend of mine had shown me this, cool but confusing game his brother had, which turned out to be the old white box, D&D set, with
Right.
the thing. And we had looked at it. We were 11 or whatever, and we looked at it. We had no clue what to do, with that. But anyway, the Holmes box set came out, and I'm like, that looks like something I could probably figure out. And so I got it. My friends and I started, going through it. And the thing back then, I think it as anyone who started back then remembers, the rules are very minimal. There wasn't a whole lot of instruction on how you play a role playing game,
No.
versus other things. There was an awful lot of guesswork to it, and there were lots of big gaps. And as an adult, if I'd started playing back then as an adult, I would have looked at it and said, "I'll just fill in these gaps, with whatever." But as a child, you're like, "There's no rules for this. What do I do?" And so that's part of my beginning of my learning experience of coming up with rules to fill in the gaps, in games, which was a great skill to develop, and but we muddled through that. We figured out how to play, and then AD&D First Edition had hit, and
Mm.
bought those books, which at that age, I mean, that was a big investment for me,
Oh God, yeah.
oh my gosh,
DMG was DMG was 15, Player's Handbook, and the Monster Manual were 12, at least initially.
Right.
Then they were 15 and 18.
Right.
I remember because I was at the same point, somewhere between 12 and 13, probably around 1980, and I
Hmm.
came in with AD&D. My friend just had the DMG and ran me through a session, made a phone
Right.
call. Did he level up? And I borrowed that book off and on for 6 months while telling my mother how much I wanted to play Dungeons and Dragons. She went out and she bought me Player's Handbook,
Hmm.
the DMG, and a nice set of dice, quality set of dice for my birthday that July. And then I was done. That was it. I was hooked for life.
Hooked for life. Yeah, me too. And to put this in perspective for some of our younger viewers, when I was a child, which a few years earlier than that and all that, I could buy a comic book, a Coke, a can of Coke, and a candy bar for $1.
Yeah.
And so when you're talking about that's a few years earlier. It had gotten to be a little more expensive by that point, but you put that in perspective, $15, these a few years later, that's a lot of money. And so I got my player's handbook, bought it used off another kid who had decided he didn't like the game.
Okay.
I was one of those kids that never spent his money on anything. I saved all my birthday money and everything. So that's how I got the other books, and I was hooked. And that's what my friends and I started playing. And I was with the same basic group through junior high and high school, and we just played unbelievable amounts, D&D, and then other things as they came along. Champions, we played a lot of Champions in the day, and
Champions, the game with buckets of D6.
buckets and buckets and lots of math.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh
But
God.
how it was back then. There were all kinds of little things coming out, and we would experiment with different types of systems, and um, we had a deal where we took turns GMing, or DMing,
Right.
back then. We didn't quite have a shared world, but we would let each other's characters float between, games and all that. So as much play experience as I got, DM experience, and that was just loads of fun. I was not the kid in high school that was going out and sneaking out and getting drunk, or what have you, because that would have interfered with my D&D time.
Oh, well, exactly. My parents loved the fact that I was playing D&D. My mother
Yeah,
was great. She was like, have them come to the house.
right.
If it was warm, it was used the backyard, or if it was winter, use the dining room table. I think we broke two. One of my friends was really heavy. I think he broke two chairs at the dining room table by jumping
Oh,
around and sitting on them. But
yeah.
as she put it, she goes, I know where you are.
Where
I
you
know
are,
where your friends are. I know who your friends are because you'll bring them to the house. So she goes, I know what your influences are.
right?
And she's like, if this is, helping you with your schoolwork, which, I knew words that some of my teachers didn't know because you learned them from the Dungeon Master's Guide. It's
Right.
like, but it was, again, I wasn't going out to sneak into a bar at the age of 16
Right.
because it would have taken away from time playing D&D. You
Playing D&D, right? And you can play D&D drunk, but I think the quality of I didn't want to screw up my character. I wasn't interested in that anyway. I was just too excited to be playing, D&D. And I was
yeah.
a pure geek.
Well, as we hit the legal drinking age, and we had a couple of game sessions where people were drinking at the game, I had to make a rule. I was like, listen, no drinking at the table. And not that we didn't have parties that we would throw, but they were, if we're going to drink, it's just drinking. Because if you
Right.
drank when you were playing D&D, you couldn't focus the group and it got damn silly.
And next thing you've got a total party killer or something like that.
Yeah.
I've been,
You know, well,
yeah.
yeah, it definitely happened. And with my group, quickly it became D&D, AD&D is
Mhm.
to be run by Eric and Eric only.
Ah,
Dave would run riffs or GURPS. Or everybody, but if they wanted to play D&D, I was the only one. And I was like, but I want to play it once in a while as a
right,
player.
right.
No, I was the official, DM for the D&D sessions. I think we all got our roles back then.
Well, my parents were the same way. They, my mother was a high school teacher, so
Okay.
she knew what all, high school kids got into and all that. But I never had a curfew once I started driving and everything,
Right.
because the deal was, she said, I know that what you're doing is you're going to play D&D or other games.
Right.
I know you're going to so and so's house, and the idea was that if you're going there and you're going to be, late, you're going to play past 10, or you're going to play past 12, you're going to play past whatever.
Mhm.
Every couple of hours, give me a call, even if it wakes me up, and say, I'm still here. You know, give me a call when you leave. And she said, as long as you're honest, you're staying there, you're giving me the call when you leave, then we don't need a curfew. And so I never had a curfew. My friends did,
Right.
but I was a very kind of rational kid, and I was like, those are logical rules. If I follow those logical rules, I get to do what I want, and my mom and my dad are happy, and so it all works out good for everyone. And so,
Yeah.
we would, how it is, in high school, we would do these things where you go to someone's house, you stay all weekend, and you play like, 18-hour stints, and, you fall asleep
Oh
for
yeah.
30 minutes and wake up, and
Wake
what
up.
happened,
It's, yeah, it's like, yeah, listen, dude, I'm just gonna curl up on your back porch for a little bit. I think I just
Right,
need some
right.
rest. And then yeah, then their parents come down and like, you're all still here.
Right, right. But I had a friend who, until he started playing D&D, um, had never read a book in his life. There was one book he had to read for school that he couldn't, somehow get out of, and it was
Right.
some little bit of, usually like, Disney movie adaptation thing. But he got into high school and he'd never read a book cover to cover in his life until he started playing D&D. And then, by God, he read, the Player's Handbook, the DM Guide cover to cover.
Mhm.
That led to, getting interested in fiction, fantasy fiction,
Okay.
which led to more reading and all that. I had another friend who just struggled with math, struggled, got into D&D, and particularly into Champions, when we were playing that. And he
Right.
learned the math because he wanted his character, to be better in Champions and all that,
Okay. Yeah.
his
Yeah.
math
No math
scores
for that.
go
Yeah.
up, and so, uh, my parents, their parents, they were seeing the beneficial effects of this type of thing. Along comes the satanic panic, when I was in junior high, and
Yep.
my I'm in Texas, so we had some real, people picketing schools and things like this. My mother, I just started playing D&D, around that time. My mom said, explain to me again. She wasn't taken in by the whole stank panic thing.
Right.
She said, explain to me D&D again, basically so that if her friends questioned it, she could say, well,
Right.
no, it's not that. This is what my son's playing. So I explained it. She's like, so what's all the hoopla about, And I said, I don't know. I don't know why they're upset. But, her whole thing was, my son's not doing anything wrong. So, he'll run it down for me. And then if anyone questions it, she's got my back, my dad too. And so I didn't have to, I had a friend who had to hide his D&D stuff from his parents. And
Oh,
we would go,
I know what that was like. I wasn't me, but yes.
uh, we would go play at his house, and we'd play in his room, and we would set up a Monopoly board on his bed, okay, or some other game. And we'd,
Right.
we'd make it look like we'd been playing, and we'd be playing D&D. And when you heard his parents coming down the hall, threw the D&D books under the bed, and then we'd start playing Monopoly. And they'd open the door, and we're in the middle of Monopoly, and then they'd walk
Oh
away,
God.
because they were convinced we'd go to hell. He would go to hell, But
Oh yeah. Right.
that's
That
just
was
the
that was part of the time,
part
you
of the
know,
time. Yeah.
and it lasted a good, 4 or 5 years. I mean, it impacted me. I must have been like, I don't know, 17, 18.
Mhm.
And I mentioned this. I'll go briefly. My mother's aunt, my grandmother's sister, Aunt Norma, also known as Sister Camilla, full
Oh,
black cab. I mean, it was a nun that didn't believe in Vatican II, so you had to have a Latin mass.
oh my
And we're
gosh,
also,
yeah,
yeah, and
yeah.
her
Full
my
penguin,
mother.
penguin nun.
Oh
Yeah,
yes, my
yeah,
mother would have to sew the coif because nobody was making them even back then. So my mother was the one that would have to do that by hand for my Aunt Norma,
yeah.
and my parents are up in the Poconos because there's a family home up there, and I'm home here in Queen. I'm going to play D&D, right? My friend, I'm not going to spend my summer away. I'm going to spend my summer with my friends the game. And Norma was visiting because she was going to watch my grandmother who lived upstairs. And because my grandmother was getting old and little senility was starting to sneak in.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a hot summer night. And I said, I'm going to sleep in the living room where the only air conditioner in the whole house is. And I did. And I wake up the next morning to my parents' phone ringing. So I pick it up and I'm like, hello? I'm like, yeah. I was like, did you not sleep in your bedroom last night? I'm like, no, my bedroom was upstairs. I'm like, no. I go, and my grandma lived upstairs, but I had a room off of her apartment. She's like, oh, okay. Well, Norma couldn't sleep last night because of the heat. I'm like, okay. And so she went to your room. And well, apparently she has decided that you are a Satan worshiper because you have dragon magazines and Dungeons and Dragons and books that tell you how to cast spells. I'm like, huh? She goes, just listen, you've been playing D&D for a number of years. Did they teach you how to cast spells? I'm like, no. Norma's there for another 5 days. We're not coming home for another 5 days. So do us a favor. I'm like, what? I know you're going to play D&D with all your friends every day anyway. I'm like, yeah. But just play a game other than D&D. I know you have science fiction ones and other stuff. Just for the next couple of days. So Norma, just put your D&D stuff in the closet. She doesn't need to see it. She was going to throw it out for us. But mother's like, let us take care of it as his parents when we get home. Like,
that was smart.
Oh,
that was smart.
So yeah. So and it's just Norma. Otherwise, sweet woman. Post 9/11, when I was a cop, I had to pick her up at Newark Airport, and she was legally blind and mostly deaf at the point, but still in a black habit. And I come up to find her, and they let me through to pick her up. I was surprised at the gate, and as she sees me walking up, and I get close enough, she finally recognizes who it is. It's her great nephew, and what does she scream out because she's deaf? Oh, Eric, nice. Did you bring your gun? God. He got the National Guardsman at Newark on this area on the second floor above me, and I'm just like reaching into my shield and ID. I'm like, Norma, look, I'm off duty and left my duty firearm at the police precinct. I was like, oh my God, don't shoot me. But God rest her soul. She always meant well, and I'm sure she meant well with me. But it was just one of those incidents back then. I was like, my parents were at least thinking out of the box. We know you got other games. What are they? Traveler, They knew. They because again at that time frame, we were probably playing everything. D&D was Kleenex. Everybody called role playing. Are you playing D&D? Yeah. So what are we playing? RuneQuest. What are we playing? Traveler. Star Frontiers. Warhammer. But we're playing D&D. We're getting together to play, because if you said you're playing role playing games, the average person would go, huh?
Yeah. That's what I did. That's like you said. It's like Kleenex. If they didn't know, I would just say D&D, and usually someone had heard something about that. Oh yeah, my cousin plays that. Or God forbid, I saw that movie with Tom Hanks. With the steam tunnels. And then you had to go this long thing about, no, we don't go into steam tunnels.
Yeah, we don't do that because there are no steam tunnels at college anyway.
Right.
And no, we don't go into the sewers, and I don't check the water. The abandoned subways in New York City, we don't do any of that. We just use dice and our imagination, and I know the difference between imagination and reality.
Right,
exactly. You had to explain people with that wonderful movie. People that were already inclined to be confused got more confused, and those that were already against the game for what they felt were moral reasons were now like, and you see, it turns them into murderers.
Right. Yeah, that was. I remember when I saw the movie, when it came out, I'm like, oh, a D&D movie, what's this about, and the whole time I was like, oh God,
Yeah.
because you knew it. I knew what again, this is Texas. I knew what the effect was going to be, and
Right.
I mean, we had people that picketed our junior high and passed out flyers claiming that Procter and Gamble, was satanic because they had the Procter and Gamble, they had a little symbol that
Oh,
had the man in the
the
moon, and they were.
yeah.
I remember getting these flyers. I wish I'd kept them because they were really bonkers, about this proves that Procter and Gamble is gonna, if you buy their products, you're selling your soul to the devil and all that. And so I saw that movie and I was like, oh no, oh
Yeah.
no.
And
So,
weren't they also saying that about like Dodge? Because the Dodge Ram, the Dodge Ram was a symbol of Satan because it was a ram.
a ram to go. Oh, I'd forgotten that. That sounds
Yeah.
that sounds familiar.
Yeah.
You're right. Yeah, it was. Oh, but anyways, a different time. But the great thing about it, about those early days of playing the games and all, you didn't have the resources you have today, and
No.
so you had to learn to adapt. You had to learn how to deal with the lack of rules. You had to learn how to write your own materials. Because there's only so much out there, particularly in the really early days, and I couldn't afford it. When I'm 13, I
Right.
couldn't run around buying every Judges Guild thing that came out, or what have you. Um, and so I think in the long run, 40 something years later, some of the skills that I had to learn as a DMGM, during that time period, have proven to be very useful over time. As I've played other games. Plus, it's been just fascinating. Watching the hobby start. We were kind of there from almost the beginning. Not
Yeah.
quite a few years after the beginning. From almost the beginning to see what it's developed into and how it's changed, and how ideas about role playing and the ways that people role play have changed and expanded over time.
Well, I think it's just interesting to watch the early internet with all the net books that came out, and then
Right.
TSR having the net books removed because, God forbid, anybody writes about their material if they're not controlling it.
Right.
And then you go a few years later, something like the OGL, and less the D20 license, but the open game license wouldn't have been the huge success that it was for us as a hobby without the internet,
Right.
without the and now with self-publishing, it has certainly become a huge thing.
It's
Uh,
the whole self-publishing thing in particular, like you said. I mean, it's like a renaissance. Kind of like the Renaissance was historically. It's this grand flowering of ideas, um, which is great. I mean, it's wonderful. We're in a kind of a golden age of role-playing games that I
yeah,
never thought we'd see. I thought the heyday had come and gone.
the open game license, which has been picked up by other companies with other systems because it allows people to make content to support your game, and therefore makes your community around your system bigger just by supplying it.
Right. Right.
I think we've learned that, well, having one company supply all the material for a game that wants to become or hopes to become popular is probably not going to is not it. You stifle
Right.
creation.
Right.
And nothing's better than having lots of cheerleaders out there talking about how great your game is because they're marketing to your audience, which only
Right.
helps you as a publisher. So I
Right.
think that's kind of huge, but we never saw that coming. I
No.
never saw
No.
that
No.
coming back then.
No. I never saw it coming, and I thought, you go back from before the all that happened, and I thought, this is gonna. There'll still be people getting into the hobby because there's hobbies rarely go away completely, unless
Right.
it's something just really bizarre, or hobbies rarely go away completely. I thought there'll be more people coming in. There'll be a lot of us older folks, who keep playing because we played all of our lives, and but I thought the '80s and some of the '90s, I thought that was the big boom, and we'll just I'll still be able to find people to play with, but whatever. And then, oh my gosh, when the SRDs started coming out and everything, and when the OSR started up in particular, that was a whole separate kind of
Yep.
explosion, and so many interesting materials have come out of all this that, like you said, without the internet, never would have seen the light of day beyond a person's immediate group of players and all
Right.
that. And in some cases, your immediate group of players may not even be interested in it, but you can put it out, and there are other people who are. So any that's kind of when I started working on my thing. I'm like, I don't know how many people are going to be interested in this scene, but I figure if I am interested in this topic, there'll be some other people, and I'll put it out there and see if it flies. And that's the beauty of it. I see things coming out in ZineQuest. I see things coming out in Drive-Thru RPG. I see
Right.
things pop up on Exalted Funeral, and other places, that I've never heard of. We're like, oh my gosh, that is such an interesting idea. And I never would have encountered that,
Otherwise,
without
yeah.
internet, without, this marketplace and this online community, that's growing up around these things.
Well, definitely, and I think ZineQuest, as you see it because you're participating in it. I can see it because I've been doing these fireside chats now for the last nearly 2 weeks, and
Oh yeah.
I've been talking to so many creators, and it's awesome. But now this is you're putting out other Magic #3, the Ancient World, but that means it's third in a series.
Yes, sir.
How did you? So how did you get into starting this other Magic series?
Well, it's interesting. Well, I say it's interesting. It's interesting to me.
I'm
What
sure
it,
it should be
yeah,
interesting to all of us. Come on.
what had happened is my academic background was in cultural anthropology, and uh, the I was wanting to be a professor. I wanted to study groups around the world and teach and publish and all that. Bottom fell out of the teaching market for it. And so I left grad school, became a programmer all through the .com era because that was a hobby of mine. I was a computer
Right.
hobbyist, and I knew how to do this, and um, burned out eventually with 80-hour weeks, and the 100% travel. Went back to grad school, became a librarian, of course, because it makes sense to become a children's librarian after you've been, I mean, it was just, I sat down and I said, what do I love in life? I love working with kids. I
Okay.
love, stuff like this. So anyway, become a librarian, and I was a reference librarian for a while. So you're back to doing research for other people. And so I'd done academic research, as a grad student. I
Right.
I did lots of research just for my own. I love research. I say that's my real hobby is just researching and learning stuff. Becoming a research reference librarian, research for other people. So in digging through all this stuff, that whatever, I would amass little bits of things that were gameable. Little things here and there where I'm like, oh, that's a real interesting idea. I'm reading about this archaeology article or this history article or this whatever. Wouldn't that be interesting to use that idea in a game? So I've been amassing this stuff, and I eventually, I, I've been going to conventions since the, gosh, early '80s. When I was still in junior
Right.
high, of various types. Back then, it was a mixture. You'd have comics and role playing games stuff all mixed together in the conventions.
Yep.
But I'd never really run things at conventions until about 5 years ago. I'd always just played. So I wanted to start running some games, and I thought I'll run Call of Cthulhu because so many people want to try it, but they never have the chance. And it's really, if you get down to it, that's my desert island game. I love Call of Cthulhu. So I started doing a lot of research because I've never been into running modules or pre-written adventures. Part of the joy for me is writing my own. It's just part of part of what I like about the hobby. So
Right.
I was writing adventures to run for Call of Cthulhu for conventions. I started doing a deeper dive into folk magic, which is something that I've always been interested in. But I thought, let's really, do a deeper dive into it and see what I can find that I can, pull into these little adventures I'm writing. And so I did, and I read and I read and I read and I read, very uh, stuff that is fascinating when you dig out the interesting bits. But you may have a 30-page paper that's dry as anything, but in the
Right.
dead center of it, there's like an idea that you're like, oh, I love this. So I was doing this anyway. And when ZineQuest came along, I think a lot of us that play role-playing games always have had a fantasy of putting out our own game or putting out our own game supplement or writing an adventure, and selling it. So ZineQuest came along, and I thought, well, there's kind of an easy entry into trying this out, into trying out putting something to paper and seeing if other people, around the world are interested in it. And I was in the middle of doing hoodoo research, and hoodoo's not voodoo. Voodoo's a religion. Hoodoo is a magic system, a folk magic system in America. And I was in the middle of that, and I said, well, what if I did like a book on pulling hoodoo, into
Right.
games? Believe it or not, there is actually a role-playing game out there called Hoodoo Blues. That it's
Oh, really?
Vajra Enterprises. A lot of people haven't heard of them, but it's a very well-researched book. But I'm like, what if I did a little zine about this? And I was like, but I also, I've just finished doing some research on the Pennsylvania Dutch powwowing system, which is another folk magic system. And I've always been interested in Ozark, folk magic. So I thought, I've got all this stuff piled up. Why not just start, putting it together into kind of a zine on how to put folk magic into games, and particularly with the reference towards looking at real folk magic systems.
Right.
Whether you actually import those systems whole hog, or whether you read through them just to get a sense of the flavor and the way that folk magic tends to work, and then coming up with your own thing. There are various ways you can use that. So I gave it a shot. No clue what it's going to do. I was like, I might get one backer, I might get no backers, I might get 30. I thought I'd be lucky to get 30 backers, on this or
Okay.
something. It did better, a lot better than I thought. I got a few hundred backers, and
Very
it was
nice.
it was a lot of fun too, and the feedback I got on it was nice. I mean, the people that backed it, no, at least if anyone didn't like it, they didn't tell me that, so they were too kind to tell me. But so I'm like, maybe I'll do this again next year. So, year two of ZineQuest last year rolls around, and at the time, I I didn't feel I had done enough research into something that was for different magic systems beyond the folk magic things that the first one I focused on American and Mexican, folk magic
Right.
systems, because those aren't covered very often. And I was like, I was doing research on other ones, but I didn't feel like I was quite up to the point of being able to do a great job on a zine for some of these others, because it was taking lots of research, to dig up some of this other stuff. So I did a bestiary, bestiary. I like bestiary better, but I think it's really bestiary. So what I did is I said, I'll take the Americas,
Okay.
from. I was originally thinking, Canada, North America, Mexico, South America, and I'll look at some of the creatures that in legend people, believed were out there. So people using these folk magic systems, what kind of, supernatural creatures did they think that they might have to, deal with, out there?
Right.
I avoided the American Indian, or American Indian, I'm sorry, I'm sure I'm Asian, the Native American, apologize. The Native American stuff, mainly because it's still a very active belief system, and you've got to do a deep dive to do that justice, and things differ quite a bit from region to region, tribe to tribe. And I was like, that's not something I want to tackle. And I didn't want to just do like Bigfoot, even though that's kind of, folk legend creature. Everyone's heard of Bigfoot.
Right.
So I dug up a couple of unusual ones from America, but I actually ended up really focusing more on Mexico, South America, and the Caribbean, right off of South America, and found all these very unusual creatures that are just fascinating. But what I was finding is the common thread is, in D&D with magic, you go in and it's lightning bolts. But
Right.
real world folk magic's not like that. In D&D, you go in and, oh, here's an ogre, I slay it with my sword. But belief in real world supernatural creatures, the things in the woods you might fight, it's not that way either. A lot of the times, These are things that, particularly in South America and Caribbean, these are not things you can necessarily kill. These are not even things you can necessarily hurt, because some of them, they may be physical, they may manifest physically, but some of them have kind of a little bit of a spirit edge to them.
Right.
So the best you can do in some cases is just run away or scare them, or if you do this, they can't see you, and all that. So I'd seen all this, and I'm like, oh, that's going to kind of hose up my bestiary, because I can't provide stats or anything for how to fight these monsters. And it dawned on me, wait a minute, there's a whole other side. Just as there's a whole other way to use magic in games, there's a
Right.
whole other way to conceive of fighting monsters in games or dealing with monsters. What if you can't kill the monster? How do you deal with that in the game? Well, there's a whole new set of challenges for characters, for players to deal with. I can't kill the monster. What do I do? It's terrorizing the village. So I wrote it with an eye towards, there are no stat blocks or anything, but I kind of did a dual page thing where on one side it's like, here's the description taken from the primary sources, or at least academic sources, or
Right.
anyone who's describing it the way that people really do or did believe in it. And then on the other side, I'm like, okay, here's the best I can muddle together with a picture, because I'm using a mixture of public domain art and stock art that I can modify and all that.
Right.
And then I put in a blurb for each of them, which was the thought processes of the creature. I was trying to give an insight into these things have motivations. So what would it be thinking? I mean, if and I was trying to sort of give it a personality, so that when you play it out, maybe I could give the GM or DM, ideas about, instead of just "Rawr, here's the monster," about maybe what would this monster do and why would it do it, and then how would your characters deal with this without being able to kill it. And I thought that's a different little kind of
Yeah.
approach. So let's go with that. And it did pretty well. It did actually even a little bit better, than the first one. I probably will not do another one of those as a ZineQuest entry. I may end up doing, another Kickstarter thing, where I do do that as a separate type thing. But we get to ZineQuest 3, and by that time I'd done enough research to feel like I could tackle the Magic of the Ancient World. And by that, I'm talking about the beginning of writing, so Sumerian cuneiform,
Oh,
and
okay.
things like that, up to about 400 or 500 AD. So you're talking about, at least that was the span I gave myself to work within. So basically, magic, where ancient people were able to write down what they were doing. Here's a spell that I've written down, or here's a ritual that I've written down, because then you can go back to the primary original source. And you're always dealing with translations, translation issues, because someone's got to
Right.
put it in English for, I can muddle my way through some Spanish, but if it's not in English or Spanish, I can't read German. But so that's kind of what I look at. Decided, had been doing research on the ancient Near East, the ancient Mediterranean, and the ancient Middle East. So you're looking at Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, Rome, earlier parts of, or certain era of Rome,
Right.
things of that nature. And there are other groups in there. You had obviously Alexandrian Egypt, for example. There was a time when Greece kind of ruled it. And so you had Hellenized Alexandrian Egypt. So you had Egyptians with Greek people living there and ruling, but there was also Christians and Jews and down the line Islamic people and people who worship Mithra and Zoroastrians and all this in a big melting pot, and they were writing down their magic. And so on things that survived, things that have stood the test of time, to we have an object or something. And so, for example, a lot of stuff back then they had been writing on papyrus. This is actually real papyrus. Believe it or not, you can buy papyrus on Amazon from Egypt
Oh,
now. It's like
nice.
$1. It's $1 a sheet, so you can make props with it stuff. But this stuff it's tough. I mean, it's tough, tough, tough. And in desert conditions, a lot of it survived. And so we have the Greek magical papyri that are things that, a lot of it came from roughly like 500 BC to 400 AD, that period or
Right.
whatever, where there are extensive spells and rituals written down. Um, where we know exactly what they were, and in some cases they even had notes, on them where it's like, you say this, they on the papyrus or whatever it would say like, okay, here's the spell, and then there'd be like instructions for like when you do the spell, make sure to do this and make sure to do that, so we're not only getting the text of their magic, you're getting their commentary on their own magic.
Interesting.
And it's very interesting. And in some cases, you might even have like a Greek person commenting on Persian magic. There's some writings, even some of the Greek philosophers and stuff wrote about some of this stuff. And it's a secondhand account, but sometimes that's all we have left of it.
Right.
But there are plenty of primary accounts. So, you've got the papyri. There are lots of magical gems from the period that they wrote and carved things on and wrote. You've actually got, believe it or not, magic rings where they wrote little mini spells inside the rings, and those rings survived. The one of my favorites are what are called the defixio, and I apologize to anyone who speaks ancient Greek or Latin because I know I'm just murdering that
Probably
pronunciation.
very few of my viewers, but you never know.
But defixio means to fix in place, and so what these are is they would take like a little tablet of lead or tin or sometimes silver or whatever, and they would scratch out a spell on it, and that spell may have the text and may have like a little illustration of a demon or an illustration of a god or a spirit, and then magic symbols that didn't necessarily even have uh, had lost their meaning long ago, but people knew they were magic. Anyway, they'd write these on these things, and then they'd roll it up, and they'd take a nail and go and nail the rolled up piece of lead or whatever, put a nail through it, and that would like activate it. They toss that down a well, they toss that in a tomb. Well, that stuff they still find piles of that, piles of these things. And
Wow.
you pull out the nail and you unroll it, and they can read, there'll be curses. A lot of those defixios are curses, and there'll be things like cursing a charioteer race so that, your team wins. There'll things like cursing a thief because, someone stole my sandals at the baths. And so I'm cursing them, for stealing my sandals. It's just all kinds of stuff. But because these things have survived on durable materials, we have the primary sources of them. And so that's what I've been digging through for a long, long time. But, that's not the kind of thing that I can't go and find a defixio and unwrap it. Museums aren't going to pull out their 2,000-year-old papyri for me to sit and look through.
Right.
So you go to academic sources, to the Assyriologists and the historians and the archaeologists who've taken the time to translate these things. And thank goodness, because of internet, they're putting their papers and they're putting their translations, and they put actual photos of these items online and make them available to gamers like us, or anyone else who wants to use them. And so that's the type of magic that I focused on for this one. And whereas last time I spent some time, or the first time I spent some time talking about what is folk magic and how do you use it in your campaign.
Right.
This time I am I'm basically saying, let's take this magic, and because we have so many examples of it written down, let's break it apart. What are the parts of a Greek magical papyrus spell? Do you start with a invocation to deities, and then your whatever, and then something here? What kinds of images do you put on it? What kind of magic symbols do you put on? So in addition to providing translations of actual ones that people can use in their games, I'm saying here are the parts. So if you want to come up with an original spell for your campaign, or an original curse tablet, or an original whatever that fits in, with your adventure, with the specific things to your adventure.
Right.
Here's how the DM can easily come up with one that didn't exist because it's original to the GM, but could have existed because it follows the internal logic and the pattern of it.
Oh,
So here's
okay.
how you could write something that you could have shown someone back then, and they'd say, "Oh yeah, I know what that." So I'm going to have a section on that to kind of break down how did these things work in production, and the internal logic of it. Now here are some really good examples, of how it works, and you can just, if you want to, you can just pull these examples in, or you can make your own stuff. And I've also included a little prop section. Do you want to make it a fixio? You can buy sheets of thick aluminum
Oh, wow.
like this. This is used for have you ever seen, like little pictures people do where they've taken copper or something and they've kind of, pressed out a picture on it and then they frame it?
Yeah.
Well, this is aluminum that's used for that. You can take this, you can take, a stick or something, you can scratch out your own fixio, roll it up, plunk a nail through it, toss it to your characters if they find one, and, like your Call of Cthulhu campaign, they go into a museum. Well, here you go, here's a prop. So I do a little section on, since some of these things lend themselves to props, how do you do props? And that doesn't take up a lot of space because it's really easy. But I thought that's something interesting to include for people who like to, put a little something like that in their game.
Something for
So,
like David Thompson, who commented, because I use a lot of papyrus style paper for scrolls, spells, etc.
right.
And a glass dip pen, a glass quill style fountain pen, and copper ink. Looks quite effective. Blood red ink for evil scrolls. I love it.
Beautiful, beautiful. That's exactly, that's the type of thing that, and you don't have to buy real papyrus. You can buy, uh, different kinds of paper that, look like papyrus. You can use regular paper, but it's the things like that, like David's saying, for people who enjoy doing props like that. And a lot of Call of Cthulhu people, DMs really, really, or keepers in Call of Cthulhu really enjoy props. But some people in other games do. Some people don't want to fool with that. You don't want to, mess with that, and that's okay, because they don't, the instructions only, since they're simple, they only take up a couple pages in the zine. The rest is more standard stuff. But I kept it system neutral, so there are no stat blocks. It's, here is stuff you can bring into your game, and then here are ways you can bring it to your game without just needing to copy a spell with a stat block. So I delve a little bit deeper into how do you utilize this kind of low magic that is almost more like cantrips, in some games is what real magic is like. Um, how do you utilize that? What do you do with a character who knows magic, but they can't cast lightning spells? They don't have battle magic of any kind, where the things that they do, maybe it takes 2 weeks before you'll see an effect. Maybe they're casting crop magic. Maybe they're casting, magic so the cows don't leave the field. Or maybe it is something like a big curse or a big protective spell, but there's no flashy effect. You
It's more
don't know for
practical. Yeah.
you don't know for sure that it worked. How do you incorporate that into games without frustrating your players? And how can players use that kind of thing and see it as a challenge without uh, needing to feel that they're wasting their time, that type of thing.
Uh, That is awesome, man. It's
Yeah,
a lot of depth that you're, even if you're just using it for NPCs on that side, just having
right,
that depth is awesome. And being systemless or system neutral
right,
means that you can integrate it into whatever magic system your RPG is using, because
exactly.
this is more of the trappings as opposed to the mechanics, and that's
Exactly. Exactly. And so trappings, like, for example, if you have spells that, are bring you good luck, or you have things to curse your enemy, or things that whatever, you bring it into, say, the OSR type games, or into D&D or things like that. That may translate in the game to giving you a plus or minuses on a couple of rolls, or something like that. Or it may just be the trappings of, a druid's casting a weather spell, and what you do is in the game is, okay, here's a way that if they want to flavor it the way in a kind of a Sumerian flavored campaign, or a Greek flavored, druid or whatever, maybe this is how they go about it. Now it still changes the weather, and you can decide, is the effect immediate, or maybe you say, okay, well, the effect takes a little bit longer, but I'll give your character a couple pluses to have it work. The GM can work that out, with them. Maybe you just use it as flavor for non-player characters, like you said. You go into a town, you got to figure out who it is that's cursing the cattle, and here's the way you flavor that, that bad, magic user they find. Maybe you want to come up with your own, you know, magic system, folk magic system, or ancient magic system for your own game. Maybe you're using the OSR, you're using something else, and you're wanting to layer your own kind of system into it, or coming up with a completely different game. You read through this and see how do things work, and how did things work in real world magic, and then that's inspiration for coming up with your own.
Hmm.
It's like, okay, that's how they did that. Well, I've got this idea for my own, and here that kind of gives me an idea of maybe some things to do it. Maybe that's the way you do it. Maybe if you're playing a historical game where magic isn't real, this is still giving you insight into the thought processes of your characters and your NPCs, because magic may not be real, but they're still going to be thinking in terms of.
Right, because they're going to still believe in the magic that they know because of their culture to
Right,
be hedge
right,
magic or whatever it is.
or whatever it is, right. And one of the fascinating things, just sort of as an aside, I talked earlier about the Greek magical papyri and stuff. Because you had so many people in Alexandria and other areas like that coming in, when you read them, sometimes they would write the spell out in, like, say, Demotic Egyptian, and then they'd write it out in Greek, and then they'd write it out in Hebrew, and then they would have a call to, like, 10 different gods from all these different pantheons. And even in some of the later ones, you see, that they'd be like, oh, and this Jesus guy too, whatever, Zeus
You
and
cover it all.
Mithras, or whatever. And then they put in these magic symbols, and stuff. And it's like a cover it all, something will work. And you might go to someone and say, I need a spell to do this, or I need, whatever. So they cover it all. And in some cases, we found, or I say we, people, or whatever, they found, like, the a scroll where it's like, when your client comes, copy this, and then it would leave blanks for inserting the client's name, so, make
Oh,
sure that so
that's
whatever, and there'd be like a blank, where you write in the client's name, and then sometimes the instruction would say, and just insert the usual stuff at the back. It literally says, insert the usual at the end, and so we actually have the templates that some of these guys are using, but so you get a mishmash. And um, even if you look at, I think, if you look at my page at the campaign, there's a graphic of like a Pandora woman with all these magic symbols kind of coming out, of a cloud. Those are called characteris, and what they are is they're magic symbols that eventually lost their meaning. So they may have started out as Egyptian hieroglyphics, and you get into Alexandria, and so these Egyptians, were writing some hieroglyphic symbols on, but their clients didn't know what they mean. They just, their clients might be Greek, and they're like, oh, that's a magic symbol, when it's really something written in Egyptian. Over
right.
time, then the Greeks go back and they're like, well, I'm going to copy this spell that I got. And so to them, it's just a magic symbol. And so some of these things that originally were words in other languages just became generic magic symbols. And they figure the gods know what these mean, but I don't know what they mean. So I'll just put a bunch of them all over my stuff. And when you go down later in history, when you get into the grimoires and the magic in the 16th century, and in the Renaissance,
Right.
and all that, a lot of those magic symbols you see, some of the old, not the alchemists, but sorcerers and stuff from that period writing down, are like debased um, hieroglyphics from way back when, where they just know it's a magic symbol, but they don't know what the original meaning was. is. So
Interesting.
if you delve into this stuff, if you're running a historical campaign, say that's set in the Middle Ages, or that's set in the Renaissance, or that's set, in the 1800s, Victorian occultists or whatever, even reading through this stuff, you can see the roots of what they were doing. And so if you're doing historical research into their stuff, you'll say, that right there, I recognize that. That was an old Greek caricature, which whatever. So from that perspective, there are people who are even running more later, campaigns with real world magic.
Hmm.
There's stuff you can pull out of that to kind of add to it. So
That's pretty damn awesome, man. Now I'm getting inspired just by this. Now, when somebody backs the current campaign for other
yes,
Magic number three, the Ancient World, they get more than just other Magic number three,
right,
correct?
correct. I went into this and I didn't want to do stretch goals. One, because it's a zine. We're not talking about a more kind of complex product. I didn't want to do stretch goals. I thought if I've already done the work on some stuff, instead of saying, if I get to this amount, I'll give you this too. If I've already done the work, and I've done almost all the work on this stuff already. I do the 90% of the work before I launch a campaign. If I've already done that work, instead of stretch goal, I'd rather just give it to you. And so in this case, with the third issue, I'm like, I've got those first two issues in PDF, already. So I'll throw those in. So if you back at any level, PDF only level or a print level, you also, in addition, to what you get for the new one, you get the PDFs of issue one and the PDFs of issue two. And then issue two with the bestiary, there's a separate set of PDFs, or a separate PDF, a big one, that has a lot of minis, paper minis for the critters, so that you can print out and then cut out and then
Oh,
put
that's
on a
very
base.
cool.
And so it covers all the creatures in the second bestiary. So I put that in too. So say you back at the PDF only level for issue three, you get that PDF for issue one, PDF for issue two, the PDF with the paper miniatures, and possibly another one. There's something else I'm trying to put together out of work I've already done, and I don't want to say what it is because I can't promise it, because I'm not sure if it's going to translate well, onto another one. But anyway, if you back the PDF level, which is $5, you get all that. Um, the zines are all 40 something pages long, so that's about 130 pages worth of content. Um, and if you back the PDF level, if you want to print out a copy for yourself, by all means, print out a copy for yourself. I actually put something in the PDFs that, in case you go to a copy shop and they question you, that says, backers are free to make their own copy for personal use, in case anyone ever happened to challenge you. So for international backers, that may be their best option, even though I do have
Right.
a print level for international backers. Their best option might be, to print it out themselves. I'm not reprinting the first two issues because that's just beyond the scope of what I think I can accomplish, right now in the time given. But if you back at the print level and you're in the U.S., then it's $10 for the print copy and all those PDFs, and the shipping's included in that. There's no separate shipping charge. So your $10 is that. If you back at the international level, I had to put a $5 more on that because the shipping rates have gone on and their Brexit issues. So if you really want me to send you a print copy internationally, that's $15, and that's for the print copy plus all the PDFs and everything. Um, and I will do that. I have done that in past campaigns. We've never had an issue, but I fully understand, that's a lot to pay for, a single, print PDF. And international shipping right now is kind of twitchy, and
Yeah.
especially for Brits with Brexit right now, there's some twitchy stuff. So I will happily ship you one internationally if you want. But if you just want to back it, the $5 PDF level and then print it there, more power to you. And that goes for, anyone anywhere. If you're in the US and you're like, I really want to print copy those first two issues, then by all means print it. I actually have the first one up on Drive-Thru RPG. It's in a square-bound format. If someone wanted to do that, but you can print it too. I'm not. Uh, any way you can get it in whatever format you want. I just want people to enjoy it and use it and have fun with it.
That's awesome, and that's very generous. I mean, personally, folks, if you can back and you're going to get all three issues, whether it's PDF only, or if you're going to go back for the current issue or in print, you're going to get the others in PDF. The material you're going to get is going to be priceless. Somebody else has done all the research for you. I mean, what better way to step in is that? I mean, you could have done it yourself. And I was a history major. I did a lot of research, and I did not necessarily enjoy it, but the end result was always something that was usable and presentable. But I think Jesse is going to be giving us some stuff that we're going to be using for years. So, Jesse,
Well,
thank you.
oh, thank you. Well, kind of what, like you said, what I think the I guess the value that I'm trying to bring to this is let me do the slog, let me and all that.
Oh,
I would like to mention, if you don't mind, I've started a
yeah.
blog, woodcutgames.com, and Woodcut Games is just me. It's just, whatever. But the reason I started that is there's a lot of material I can't fit into the zine. And so I'm just going to throw it out as blog posts. Interesting spells I found or interesting whatever that couldn't fit into this zine. I'll throw it out there, and if anyone wants to go through it, and also, a lot of the online sources I use, if anyone wants to dig deeper, that's kind of what the blog is here's the rest of the stuff if you want to use it, is the focus of it.
So, what's it called again?
Woodcutgames.com. I only have a few posts on there because I just decided to start it like last week,
Fine.
But the goal of it is more or less that as not only the material, the research I've already done, but as I do other research on other things, there's so much of it. There's so much I just can't get into print, but I'm still slogging through it. I can still winnow it out and throw it out there, and then use it as you may. Whoever would like.
Cool.
To
Folks, if you're listening on the podcast side, I will include a link in the show notes for woodcutgames.com. As Jesse was talking, I already put it in. It's already in a tab. I'll be looking at it once we wrap this up. Again, Jesse, man, thank you. This is good.
Thank you very much. It's the folks like you who are, they're helping us advertise, the ZineQuest stuff, but also give us a chance to talk about the things that, it's hard to write up all your thoughts on your zine, on, the zine you're putting up on your page without it being, just ridiculously long. So much easier to talk to someone like you and, get some of that out, so giving us this forum is invaluable, and I really thank you for this. Thank you so much.
I thank the listeners, the viewers that were viewing live and commenting. Folks, I've been doing this now for nearly 2 weeks on a daily basis. It's been going great. I've got more lined up. Tomorrow, not part of ZineQuest, but certainly adjacent to it, I will have I'm having sorry, Scott, I'm having a brain fart. R. Scott Taylor. I couldn't remember the first initial that you used. R. Scott Taylor, he's probably best known for the Folio. Folio is basically it's a magazine. He takes it one step further. He's in color. He's got removable covers. He's been doing this for years. I've been following his stuff. I finally got a chance to track down Scott. So that will be tomorrow night, Monday night, 8 p.m. Eastern. And then later on this week, Bad Mike and myself will be hosting special guests from TotalCon, 8 p.m. Eastern, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And then after that, I think I'm going to take a nap or something like that because
You need to. You've been working really hard.
but I do
Yeah.
it because I love it. I enjoy it. So as long as my voice holds up, I'm good. And if I start losing my voice later on this week, I got bad mic. All right. Again, thank you, Jesse.
Thank you, sir.
As usual, when the world of COVID, use your common sense. You wouldn't throw a fireball in a 10 by 10 room and kill the party outside the room in the hallway. Use your common sense when it comes to COVID. I'm not a doctor. Jesse's not a doctor. But common sense. Be safe, be well. God bless. Roll those dice. And I'll be back tomorrow, folks. Thank you again.